Hi there. It's not your fault, but together we can choose to do something about it. Stay tuned.
Voices of humanity, we need to hear your voices. We need to hear your voices.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Voices of Humanity at prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media. A very warm welcome, let me speak, a very warm welcome to you. I am Sandra McKechnie, and I'm your host, and I'm feeling great about that. We've got some good shows lined up for you. And if you're going to watch this, of course, on the replay, please like, share, comment, and subscribe so we can get this very important content to you. And there's some amazing things before our lovely guest, Sheila. We've got some other content. Please check into that. Would really appreciate your subscription and your support. Well, put your hands together and welcome Sheila Walsh. I'm going. I'm going to actually read a little bit about her bio. So let's see. There's a lot in here, but we're gonna unpack some of that, and some of that she may decide she doesn't need to share or whatever. But it's a little bit about her. Great bio. Sheila Walsh specializes in leadership development, supporting leaders to be more effective, strategic, and impactful while harnessing authenticity and utilizing their strength and values to create better outcomes for themselves, their people, and the organization. She's based in Dublin. I love the way she says it. She'll say Dublin. She's based in Dublin and working throughout Ireland internationally and online, specializing in leadership development and inclusive practices with a background in coaching psychology and organizational development, and over a decade working with clients in Ireland and internationally. Voted in the top 10 coaches in Dublin by Influence and Digest. And those are magazines, right? By Influence and Digest, and speaks on international stages about leadership, inclusion, and coaching psychology. She is interested and commitment, Sheila's interest and commitment, to trauma informed and inclusive practices originate from her wider experience of working across society. Welcome, Sheila. We've met before, and Sheila and I actually, well, we met before this because we were kind of looking at where we were heading and what the great content that we want to give you. This is the biggest thing for me for this show, is to really give you something genuine and authentic. And so Sheila and I met. It was a capsule, AOC. I always say that funny. AOC. Can you give me the meaning of the acronym again?
Association of Coaching Supervisors.
There you go. So I sort of got my certification at an academy in Canada, and then I kind of sort of did a little challenging of how double consciousness, most of you may know by now, that's what I do, two streams of thought, two social identities. And it has everything to do with the people that descendants of trans-Saharan trade, transatlantic slave trade, apartheid, colonization, imperialism, all of that, all of the ma'afas, right? And how those people show up in the 21st century. So I challenged, my school a little bit in a respectful way. It was a great way. And then I got an opportunity because of that to speak and just share a little bit about double consciousness and what that looks, and in terms of the anti-bias, anti-oppression lens, and BIPOC, DEI. So I want, I'm going to ask Sheila to get into that, and it's in terms of how she's gotten here and why those lens, BIPOC, DEI, some say the equity first, EDI, but and why is that so important to her, and kind of let you just know a little bit about her. So the challenge for me today was really, how are we coaching? Can we coach everybody? That might be our little blanket thing today. Can every coach everybody? Can you coach the Indigenous, no matter what you are, and you're coaching the Latinx, you're coaching Muslims, LGBTQs. Who are you coaching and why? And what does that look like? And should we be? So we can just unpack that and see explore a little bit today. Sheila, tell us a little bit more and why this means so much to you.
So will I go into the question or a little bit more about where I'm coming from?
Yes, both. Like, I just wanted to know like a little bit more about how you got where you are, what your passion is, and what that looks like, and then the DEI BIPOC lens, why that's so cohesive for you.
Yes, so I suppose I got here by accident. I think that genuinely is the most honest answer.
Yes.
I was pursuing my own kind of development and learning, my own healing, and as I went on, I just started to train in models that I thought were really helpful. And part of training is you have to do a lot of pro bono work. So I was off like trying to get people, my heart goes out to them now, to like to trust me for my hours so I could sign off on it. And then they referred and things kind of gathered momentum. I suppose what's been interesting for me around the inclusion lens, because that's the kind of lens that my research is around, but it's also the lens that I would say passionate about, but that I think might be a solution. How I got into this was I've had multiple experiences for various reasons of knowing what exclusion looks like and knowing what it looks like for systems to not be built for me or people I care about. And before I understood EDI or D&I, I knew that some systems, while it looked like everyone could access them, they couldn't thrive. And something about that confused me, because the very systems that said we're here for society neglected the most vulnerable or traumatized or neglected or oppressed areas of society. And so something about that, if I'm really honest, first didn't feel right because I had direct experience. I was like, something about this, I know that I'm not being treated equally. But then I looked out and I was like, whoa, the amount of privilege I have. So if I'm feeling this, there are people with identities that are marginalized far more than my experiences, who are also trying to enter these spaces that aren't being held, although nobody is necessarily consciously excluding them in them, which may be happening. The majority, there wasn't conscious exclusion. There is inbuilt oppression and exclusion. And so that I started to be really curious in terms of coaching. The psychologies we're using were really privileged. The evidence base is in very small cohorts. I was going into conversations and we were almost, when I speak to peers, as if that isn't relevant. But yet somebody's lived experience is central to coaching and even central to supervision. And yet we were saying, yeah, their lived experience, but not systemic oppression. And there's work that I began doing with someone called Myra Chan, and Myra Chan works very much around anti-oppressive practice in terms of our practices in coaching and in therapy. And that was really helpful for me to have an awareness of things I couldn't have had an awareness of. And I started to notice that more and more people are having to fight harder and harder just to have experiences that others who have no awareness that they're privileged are actually having. So I realized that actually what we think is privileged should really be what we all are having. But when we're privileged, and I include myself in that in different ways, when parts of our identity is privileged, we don't know it. But the people who don't have that privilege, they know it. They are assured that we have privilege and access. So I think that's how I kind of stumbled into the inclusion element, because I just started noticing that the interventions I was doing or the people I was working with, that sometimes it was only really serving a kind of dominant group or assumptions about what people need. And we weren't meeting people with their lived experience as adequately as we were saying we were. That was my experience, both what I witnessed and in my own practice. And that led me into being curious about inclusive leadership, because I was wondering if I was working at a community level in a lot of ways, and I kept noticing that funding was being limited or interventions were being limited on a community level. And I was like, they're being limited by people in power. And I was like, what's the people in power's relationship with the things we're actually doing on the ground? And that's where my interest in inclusive leadership became really strong. This belief that if you could help people in positions of power understand their impact and their unconscious bias and their privilege and their capacity to create change, we could see the ripple effects that we're currently seeing in a negative way. Maybe we could see positive ripple effects. So that's kind of where my interest kept growing and growing. And that's kind of how
Yeah.
I'm sitting in front of you, Sandra.
I was thinking we had mentioned, I love that. Thank you for that awareness, because first of all, I love that you are wanting our viewers to know who you are and what was happening to you, why you were dissatisfied. And in this, I noticed that sort of dissatisfaction about with you and Fenella, who was on a few weeks ago. Um, that's why there was other people in this little collective little capsule that we were in, but I kind of zeroed in on you and Fenella. These are coaches of coaches. Like these are big, huge, big up people in coaching right here, Sheila and Fenella. But my thing is this that really concerned me, and I was so glad that you were bringing it up. I remember you were in there writing everything down, and I just kind of thought I need to have them in genuineness and authenticity on this show, because there are coaches out there. Not only are there pseudo coaches out there thinking they can coach anybody, and they're psychologists and therapists, but there are people that don't recognize that if one of my Indigenous brothers and sisters come in front of me, you don't have to have a degree in anthropology to for all the groups. But should there not be some level of, we call it a 411 here, that we used to dial 411 for information. Should you not have a little bit of information, or, you know what I mean? I'm thinking I'm going in there to coach people. I had know nothing about them. I'm not saying people have to go in and give an acknowledgement, a land acknowledgement, but is it not important that we're aware of the people? You're aware of Blacks if you're a white person. You know, not that we're just all the same as you're coaching, but you understand this lens and what, not only just right now in the 21st century, but why going back 21st century, 20, 19, 18, 17 and beyond, what happened, and people that are showing up in a multi-generational way, feeling dehumanized for a lot of reasons, that, you know, and so as coaches, when I gave that offering at that little something I spoke at about this very thing was, okay, can we actually come to the point that there's a lens that we need to be looking through that's different than just what I learned in class, right? Because what I learned, and they're trying to tweak that, and I know people are trying to tweak this for sure. They're trying to look at it, but what does that mean, you know? And in terms of like in the doing, what does it mean? Like, what does it mean to you that we can? What are we going to do about this? Right? It's not regulated. Right?
No.
So,
And also, we're not agreeing in the D&I space even. So I think, like, for me, it's really important to acknowledge that our level of competency in our work does come into Myra Chan uses this great phrase, which is working within diversity, which is that actually every time I meet anybody, our identities have a relationship prior to that meeting, based on all the people that I've met before that were similar or different, based on historic things, based on systemic oppression. And I do believe that we need a level of competency to work with anybody. So there's coaching competency, and then there's competency in understanding sometimes that I don't know what I might need to know. That's a competency to say, oh, maybe they're bringing up intergenerational racial trauma that I can only understand from a book, a textbook.
absolutely.
And is that sufficient? And then there's also the piece about if somebody has chosen to work with you, and something emerges in the coaching with them, can you name it? Like, so if I have a microaggression and I'm the person in power as the coach, because there's a power dynamic when you're coaching, and even though we're trying to equalize it, there is, am I going to receive that feedback that I've done something harmful in the session, and am I willing to repair? Equally, am I able to understand how our ethnic backgrounds, our cultural backgrounds might interfere in the conversation, or equally support the conversation depending on the conversation? So I think that we haven't done enough thinking about it, but I also think that and I know we talked about the cultural piece where I was saying that race in Ireland, because of our history, has a very different history even to the UK, which is only a stone's throw away. Not that we're free of racism, and not that we're better than anybody else in terms of internalized racism.
It's true. It's different across settings, for sure.
Its expression is different. And so you could almost say, does working with someone who's Irish require cultural knowledge versus working with someone who's English or working with someone who's American or Canadian. And I think that competency is the part that we need to think about, and reflective practice. Can I own when I'm limiting the practice here? Can I own that I'm out of my depth? But can I equally not make my client responsible for my knowledge base? Like, I think that's the
Okay.
411 piece.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yes. So do I expect my client to culturally update me so that I can do my job, or do I take responsibility for that? So I work with people across different like spectrums of identity and different
Absolutely. Okay.
backgrounds. But I name it when I work with them. If I like, so I have conversations where if we have different faith beliefs, I'll say, I'm not that familiar with that faith belief. So if I'm challenging something in my coaching approach that you think is hitting off a faith belief, are you comfortable telling me that has a complication for you or attention, so that we can decide a way forward.
Right.
And some people will say, I don't want to be bothered. I'd rather just pick someone who knows my faith. And I'm like, that's your choice. I think that's valuable.
Absolutely.
And others will say to me, yeah, that's not that important. And if it comes up, I'll tell you, because that's not that's not a primary focus for me. But I think we might avoid those conversations when we're meeting clients. We might not actually acknowledge that there may be something happen between us that might limit the client's experience. And so I think from that point of view, I like your questioning around it.
Yeah.
Sandra.
I was looking at this the other day and recognizing there's someone I'm coaching now. There's a couple of people, and I'm looking at the things they're sharing with me. One, I'm supporting in areas of social justice, heavy stuff going on at work, huge structural systems that we're working with here. And I'm overwhelmed sometimes I have to decompress with somebody else, and recognizing though we're making some headway, I get triggered because I'm recognizing that Sheila, if you were in that room, that you may not, of course this person might not open up, but you may not be able to. How would you handle that? So my thing is this sort of our coaches, therapists, everybody, the clinicians, are we doing? I'm not a clinician, I'm a coach, but yourself, got a lot of therapists that are coaching now, which is really great. But is this whole psychoanalytical adjustment that people are doing? So someone comes in front of you and they say, people are a black person comes in front of a white coach, say, right? And I've been being cased in stores. People are following me. They act like I want to steal something. Now here's the psychoanalytical adjustment. So you're a white coach, you're across, and this is happening. Okay, so you're going to say, oh dear, how are you handling that? And what comes up for you, or whatever it is, how are you feel? Okay, the fact is they are being cased, so to sort of make it that I'm concerned, I think about that you might think that they're paranoid, that people are going to think, if you are not sort of aware of that, maybe not that specific aggression, but it may be something else, it might have been that person was thrown up against 2 tons of steel, a young black boy, brown, and they're saying to you, and I'm really triggered. So instead of, are we leaving them with that, oh, you need meds, and they may, I'm not saying that they're not, but I'm saying, are we leaving them that it's with more internalized trauma, because we are not really, you know what I mean?
Oh, I like, so I think this actually applies across, so it depends your approach. So one of the main approaches I use is called psychodynamic systemic. So it means that I look at it from 2 lenses always, no matter who's in front of me. One is what's your individual experience, and 2, what's happening in the system. So for instance, if anybody came and said they were having that, and because of the approach I'm trained in and I utilize, the first thing is what's happening for you, and then the second thing is what's happening in the system outside of you that is having this impact on you. And I use that in every approach, because I've yet to see an individual exist outside any system. So that's one part. But there's also a second part, which is what I have seen, which kind of joins you in your concern, is where we individualize a systemic issue, where there is evidence that this is a systemic issue. So for instance, there's loads of stats, like, just if I'm very blank and very simple, there is loads of stats that tell us, and there's loads of lived experience, which I think is equal evidence to anything statistically gathered. There is lots of lived experience that tells us this happens. And the question is, if we're in the room with someone And we can't identify through our own supervision or our own reflective practice, if we're not building an anti-oppressive practice, we are going to leave it with the individual instead of acknowledge that there might be intergenerational trauma, that there's something happening in the system, and that just because I haven't seen it or had it directly experienced it doesn't make it any less true or accurate, because they are a different person moving through the world with a different visible identity. And so they are treated differently. And that's measurable, that's there. So I think one of the challenges is that maybe a lot of the coaching training has focused on individual successes, and it's kind of neglected some more native models of community-based interventions. And I actually look at both when I work with someone, because I saw that we were individualizing mental health instead of saying, well, maybe if you came up through a traumatic system, you might have increased mental health or distress. Or maybe if you've experienced intergenerational trauma, you're going to express and experience difficulty, not because of something in you, but because of something in the system. So I think, Sandra, we're talking here about the interventions being applied correctly and knowing if, like, you know, that saying, control the controllables. I'm all for that, except if you're looking at somebody and they need advocacy or they need support because actually what needs to change is outside their individual control, then relying on control the controllables is going to be re-traumatizing, might scapegoat them to blame themselves, and might increase shame. So we do need to know when to say control the controllables, and when we say actually you require support, or you deserve you deserve more around this than just do better attitude, or this idea of assimilation, which is like, just get on with it, just don't cause any fuss. I think those approaches, I'm hoping people are moving away from in our profession. But I think you're right that they're still happening, because I've heard it.
Right.
And my friends have received it. So it is happening. But for me, I think it's about the approach and whether you can take a lens that incorporates a system view, a social view, and a community view. But a lot of coaching does teach individualism rather than collectivism. But I think if you can have an approach that incorporates both, it may actually make you more effective with communities you're not experienced direct lived experience of, because it will allow you to listen and see them as the expert of their experience. So if they tell you this is happening, you work with it as if it's happening in society. But also there is stats. So whenever I find myself caught with something, you can go and learn this stuff. Like, it's, the internet's full of it, Sandra. These these calls, like, so I think instead of just presuming an individual is overreacting or paranoid, you know, that saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean it's not true. I kind of think that's, you know, I think we have to see people's reactions and experiences as valid.
I continue on this show depending on, I mean, this is so recent. I think this is our 8th show. But because of the trainings I do and how they're affecting lives, I'm in the middle of some now, which is amazing. It has a lot to do with, if we don't know what's true back here, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17th century, say, and beyond, we can't be free. And if we don't have the knowledge, we will perish. Like, if we don't know. So it's like, you know, your hands over your eyes, over your ears, that first tapping into your conscious unawareness, not being aware that you're unaware about your relationship to all people, marginalized people, of course, non-marginalized, so-called minorities. But people will ask me, or, you know, I'll hear people share this. Do you think that Black people or brown people, Indigenous people, should they be going to white therapists? Like, how do you feel about that?
I think it's a good question. I would broaden the question. I would say, are the psychologies we're working off, whether you're a therapist or a coach, you're working off, hopefully you're working off some psychology. Were they designed for all people? So I would start with there. Forget the therapist for a second. If you're being walked through a model that was predominantly designed for middle class white people or white men, then I think we need to question the models. I think that's the starting point. The second point is, if you decide to work with a person of a different race or different ethnicity or a different cultural experience, I think it's important to acknowledge why you're choosing that. So I don't think that I can say whether people can do that or not. I think what I can say is I have worked with people from multiple backgrounds, multiple races, but they choose me. So that's the first thing I have to say, is that
Yeah.
that's a choice. But if it's something that's important to discuss, I think we should be discussing it. I think in terms of some Indigenous traditions, the traditional psychology that we've based a lot of these models on ignores them. That there is a white supremacy within these models, and I think they are harmful for everyone. So so I don't have a yes or a no. I think an individual decides, but I think we should be asking the question of the theories we're basing our work off first and foremost, and then the identities of the people that we work with, and whether those people know their privilege, the harm they can do, like whether we know and are doing the work. So,
Right.
instance, I ask people, if I'm bringing one of the parts of my identity that is marginalized, I ask people, are you in supervision that addresses your unconscious relationship to this topic? And I ask, and the people I supervise, it's the same thing that I bring to that conversation is, are you aware of the unconscious stuff like that you're bringing in when you work with that client, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's age, ethnicity? So for me, I think they're really good questions, but I don't think there's one answer, because that would be like saying everybody has the same need, or every white coach or therapist practices the same models or has the same level of awareness or has the same relationship with their race, like their race of being white, or vice versa, BIPOC or people marginalized because of their race, that all of them are experiencing it the same way. While they may be experiencing commonalities, there's also very individualistic experiences based on other parts of their identity. So I think it's really complex. I know it's kind of like, I'm not
Not at all,
trying
because I'm
to
thinking, a friend of mine, she's going to be coming on the show, because I think I'd mentioned it to you, just really passionate about how women in South India are being treated so terribly, people, period, because of the darkness of their skin. And I was joking with her. I know it's not really a funny joke, but because we're brown together, and um, we were saying that they were colonized to actually just believing that they're better than blacks because they don't have the nappy hair kind of thing, got straight hair. So they're in the basement, we're in the sewer. And so that sort of thing. But her really understanding, if that person came into someone came in, she needed coaching and was saying, I'm so concerned about how my people are being treated. And maybe they would not, because usually those conversations don't come up until like right now. We never used to be sharing this stuff as people that came across the trade. Never used to be saying this stuff. We kept it in the closet. And but now people are opening up about a lot of things, and there's a certain freedom in it. There's a lot of risk too, because some of our people are getting death threats out here. But that's the reality. But my friend goes in, she's having challenges, with people treating the women in South India really badly. And it's happening in our community here, say in Canada. And, my thing is, if somebody is going to handle this, what kind of that psychoanalytical thing again, how are they shifting that? I always think about that. And how is that person's need going to be met? And I think it definitely it depends on the coach. Because go ahead,
No,
hon.
sorry, continue.
No, you continue.
There's also there's the opposite challenge, which is the closeness. So there's like the distance of race, but there's the closeness where somebody coming from your own community or my own community, when we go to, has assumptions about us based on community norms, which may need to also be challenged, and the coach may overlook because they accept the assumptions. So there, in every,
It's interesting.
Yeah, so in every situation where we're looking at how identities meet, both closeness and distance has the capacity to harm, but equally both closeness and distance has the capacity to heal, depending on the relationship and the safety created between the two people.
So are you
For me,
saying if the coach is too involved in emotionally, what are you talking about?
no, so I mean the closeness, meaning the coach may have cultural beliefs that they
Okay.
maintain in their coaching, but
Mhm.
the client may actually be trying to break out of that cultural norm. But because the coach assumes that that's acceptable because it's their experience of that culture or that identity, they actually won't challenge that sometimes, because
Mhm. Mhm.
not all coaches, but for instance, the closeness could then become an issue. So, for instance, in Ireland, 20 years ago, if we brought up sexuality to an Irish coach, they would be like, yeah, well, it's kind of illegal here, and so really it just needs to be sorted, right? Because there was a
Yeah.
closeness that we accepted that as normal in our society at one point. Now it's changed, thankfully, but that happens in all communities where we have shared assumptions that we maintain because it's associated with our identity. So if we're coaching someone who may need that part of our norms challenged,
Yeah.
if we're close to it, we may not do that. So both closeness and distance can be harmful and helpful depending on the two individuals' capacity to see their own assumptions, norms, and bias.
For sure, but
Yeah,
like the so-called dominant group has been coaching their own for a long time, right?
completely.
So
Yeah,
for I guess all across the board, across settings, we have to be aware of it for sure.
yeah.
Right?
Yes.
That
So
there's not. Mhm. Go ahead.
in terms of the dominant, what I think is important about this is actually I think that I would love to see more Indigenous, racially, ethnically informed approaches to coaching. I think we are missing voices that would inform the approaches to be more appropriate and supportive for multiple experiences that I don't think coaching does right now. Coaching
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
meets one very particular group, I think, and I think that's missing. I think we need people who aren't being served by the coaches currently in coaching, informing the approaches, changing the conversation, challenging some of the unhelpful norms that we're upholding, I think, by not having the conversations. That yes, so there's a difference between saying closeness and distance can be harmful than saying,
Hmm. Hmm.
like my experience of coaching in Ireland and the UK so far is it's predominantly white.
Yeah.
And that I think that's a big issue because we have a limited view about appropriate interventions then because of
Well,
that.
it's I mean, the therapeutic part of it and the clinician part of it, I mean, that's a patriarchal whole thing that was initially, and then of course white women and, ethnicity, race, all of this wasn't really as predominant, was it, for some time? All right. So I'm thinking of when now, because mine is the sort of cultural sensitivity and awareness thing, anti-bias, anti-oppression, but it's for me, it's no point in me just coaching Black people, which doors are open always.
Mm.
But it is important also because we started this together. Let's finish it. So two people came back through that dehumanization thing way back there in the 17th century and beyond, in terms of two dominant groups, Black and white, excuse the bywords. But here we came, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. And some of us came home with post-traumatic slave syndrome. And according to Dr. Joy DeGruy, love that
Mm.
little it's a video, amazing. Um, and some came home with cognitive, well, both came home with this dissonance, right? And so it's challenging for people because they're like, it happened back then. And so
Mm.
I think there's a lot that has to do when I think of coaching right now, my shingles up. I'm like, if I have to go out there, go, white people, could you come on in? It's not our fault, but we together we can do
Mm.
something about this. And that leads me to, remember, I was saying to you, even when on platforms and you see there's white people talking about, you know the dehumanization of other groups, and those platforms, if people can even have it's the optics, can see the collaborative effort of different groups instead of
Mm.
everybody's in there, we had spoken about that, the opportunity. And you had mentioned, or move aside altogether and let, for some of that, depending on what the gig is,
Mm.
let an Indigenous person speak, let a Black person up in there, someone from India, let them speak, let them share what this really
Mm.
looks like. um, and I think there's a fear around people coming out of the closet, so to speak, and say, look, I'm here. I'm from South India, and this is what's happening. Like up on,
Mhm.
up on YouTube. But it's obviously something that I think we
Mhm.
have to do.
Yeah, and I think your point. I love your example of the two kind of in terms of the racial history coming forward. I think one of the things that that's missing in coaching is the competency around the impact of race, of ethnicity, of cultural differences,
Mhm.
and so uh, that power wheel, that the closer you are to the center of the power, the more kind of likable you are, as in you're given the space. I think what I'm finding shocking and upsetting is that we're I think we're going into spaces that we don't have competency to be in. I think that's what you're really pointing at. And we're
Mhm.
we're not going to the effort to have competency. And I suppose what I'm pointing at is, if you go to the effort of having competency, I don't think we have the issue. But
Mhm.
actually the issue is there is a very small amount, and I know from running my own beyond diversity programs and inclusion programs,
Yeah.
there is very few people in dominant privileged positions who have the desire to develop the competency, or even if they have the desire, make the effort. And I have to say, I was one of those people too. I didn't understand this conversation until I understood it. So I think one of the pieces about especially white privilege is that we only know, like, we've got to make an effort to know more than we do, but we don't always know what it is we need to know. But that's where we should be turning up to people with lived experience, not just qualifications, because I think that's what gets missed sometimes in some of the evidence-based models. And I do this because they're evidence-based in very particular settings with very, they don't have a diversity of participants, so they're not generalizable, but yet we talk about them like they are generalizable. Um,
Mm.
but lived experience needs to be held in equal value as evidence, because actually most of the evidence models comes from a collection of lived experience.
Hello. I was just going to say there was a term in 1995 called super predator. Okay. So I would say to people, we are the stats. We've lived them for hundreds of years, and our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and a number of other groups. Um, so yeah, we are the stats. I always say that to myself. That there was a term called super predator. So in 1995, and Clinton's got a lot of support off of this term. Now there was a guy, I believe he was from Princeton U, a professor. Now he'd made this prediction and wrote an article, and it was predicting that tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands. He just went all the way of Latino, Black, Indigenous people were going to be arrested, and they're super predators. So you've got a visual of a predator, a lion or a hawk, and it's coming in for its prey. So they were taking people left and right off of the streets for nothing. But the
Mm,
interesting thing about it was there was an apology made by this professor because the stats didn't line up. It didn't happen. And the apology was made, Sheila, but the poison was already in the cookie. So
mm,
what are people thinking? And you might walk away with your logical self, but implicitly it's gone in. It's in there.
mm,
And you know, and then take that back a few hundred years to what you've been taught already. People that
mm,
were emancipated were, or men, their MO was not rape, but every black man was being taken off the street after emancipation, right? They were being hung, of course, left, right, and center. But the view of a black man was that he was predatorial. Where did he get that? Who was raping who? But all of a sudden, our men are rapists. So when we think about um, the stats, those are our reality. Those are our stats,
mm, mm,
and when we look in the 21st century and see what that surmounts to and what that equates to, now we're
mm,
super predators, right? And now our men are rapists, and all of this implicitly is all going up in here. you know so
mm,
it creates a real challenge when and on the news there was a beautiful young black girl. I don't know if you remember it. I forget when that was, a few years ago, and she was, I guess, acting up in classes, putting her feet on the table. A black girl, in comes this white officer. Well, I was feeling so much trauma. I think it 2014, something like that. And
mm,
he takes the desk with the girl in it, small, she wasn't that big at all, and boom, with the desk, split the desk and threw this girl to the ground. And it's just like the abuse. So when you think about this impactful stuff and how compounded it is, this is when I always will sort of challenge coaches that are coaching all people or what, make sure you're not making that sort of, like I mentioned before, that psychoanalytical adjustment where it's like, well, you have, you may, now the competency thing, I know some people have problems with that. I hear it. People say, well, be competency, you can't be competent. You can be aware, but I would think that to be in your field, to be a psychologist, to be a therapist, one does need some sort of competency, I would think.
Yeah, when I say competency, I don't mean as in because I've read a book, I would then have competency. I
Right.
mean, actually, I probably mean mostly the competency to manage myself in the situation, and to know when I am working off something that is that compounded piece from externally. But like
Okay.
one of the things that I mean, like, so I don't mean like measured competencies like coaching. I think there's issues with that as well in terms of diversity and access. But I mean, like, are you going to practice? So I'm a coaching psychologist rather than psychologist. So I'm still working off that original coaching framework.
Okay.
And the question is, are you, like, for me, when am I going to supervision with somebody who also has a lived experience that is different to me, has extensive lived experience and training and understanding of what I'm going to be implicitly unaware of, so that I can address that, and then do I address it? So competency isn't necessarily that I have the knowledge, because I don't have knowledge about people. I can't presume because somebody is of a particular race that they've had exactly the same racial experience as my friends or as another client. But what I can know is that I have microaggressions that I have to watch when I become harmful in the session, which is possible for any of us in our work to actually become harmful.
Absolutely. What does a microaggression look like for you? Like in from your eyes?
Like the ones that I've done.
We've all done them. But what does it look like for you?
So I suppose it's when I project unconsciously, so I don't know about it till later. I project something onto someone based on a stereotype or a generalization. So sometimes it's not like a stereotype, but it is, I've met two other people and now I think that's true for all people that represent that way.
I think that is so important for you to share, because I think sometimes I use the word tripping. People think we're tripping because we're looking for racism or whatever under every bush. The reality is, people are being cased. People are being murdered and killed. Brown and black people, and people are being taken off the street. It did happen in our history, right? Taken off the street for rape and and for what reason? The predation thing. Wow. It's the apologies made, but the poison is in the cookie. Founding fathers are saying that we are orangutans, that we can't feel. So all of this stuff is impactful up into the 21st century. So I think it's knowing what is truth, knowing what the stats and the lived experience are huge, because the things that happen to us literally are being manifested explicitly and implicitly still in the 21st century. And that's something I think that our viewers would want, that acknowledgement to say, oh my gosh, yes. I was with a friend on a show, and she's a beautiful woman. She's going to come on this one. And we were just talking about a bit of this. And she said, something came up for her. She said, oh my gosh, I asked my mother once what would happen. I shared this last week. And these stories I'm going to keep sharing, because our stories are our lifeline. And it allows you to know that there's nothing wrong with you. It's not your fault. We can do something about it. So she's saying she said, my mother asked, I asked my mother, what would happen if I married a black man? And, she said her mom, this is a white woman from down south. And she says, well, my mom, she hemmed and hawed. And then she said, oh, say her name was Lucy. She said, oh, Lucy, I would die, Lucy. I would just die if you married a black man. And it was visceral. And we kind of chuckled about it, and then I had to sort of, in that light way, just say, do you know where that came from, though? Why would she die? Why? We have a choice of choosing whom we want to be with, but it came from 21, 20. It came with her in the time warp, and it's okay to acknowledge it. It's what it is.
But it's in our medical system. We know that like people are still currently being taught that Black women experience pain less than white people.
Fabulous,
You know, we have the BMI, which is inherently designed for a white male body, and like all of the harm that's done. We know that donor lists are based off BMI, but yet it's not designed for the diversity of bodies and ethnicities and races. Like, it's not just coming down in trauma, it's coming down in facts.
Yes.
Like, it's coming down in what is sold as a fact. And then people are being treated worse than other people. And when they're saying it to people, like, so I remember one of the big things I learned that I didn't think was a microaggression was shock. You know, when someone says to me, oh, this happened to me, and it's because I wear a hijab, or it's because of the color of my skin, or it's because I don't speak English as a first language. And I say, really? In this day, that is a microaggression because I'm leaning on my privilege of never having that direct experience. And I'm not acknowledging that actually there's a world of experiences that have, now it's a defense, so it can, like, it's an ego defense, so it can happen naturally. But what I have to do is go, Sheila, this is your privilege, instead of being shocked and them looking at me feeling like I'm not believing them, even though that's not quite what's happening. That's the experience that they're having, which is, she doesn't get it. Instead
so
of
what might you say? I think that's powerful. Like, what might you say? Because I'm going to do that. Somebody tells me something, one of my Indian sisters or my Indigenous, I don't want to do that then. I don't want to say, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Like what, how would that be handled better?
Well, I think, so the shock protects, so our ego state, the ego defense, the shock protects us from the feeling. And so what I have to do is quickly get to the feeling, which is, actually, I'm really sad that somebody I care about, or somebody that's sharing a moment with me, has had that experience. And so for me, it's more about saying, I'm really sorry and that happened. Like, I might not have caused it, but I'm sorry that happened. And then the next question is, you know, how are you with it? Do you need anything? Because if somebody said somebody slapped them, I would be like, I'm sorry that happened. You know, how are you? Do you need anything? But when it comes to oppression, we seem to be like, like, you know, just slightly more like, because we're awkward, because we don't have the lived experience of that oppression, but we do have lived experience of harm. And so,
and plus, I think all of us were kind of taught that it's meritocracy for everybody. We're all equal. Shh, don't talk about it. Pull up yourself by your bootstraps. Well, we don't got no blue boots, Sheila.
It's interesting because there's a piece of research, and I can't remember. Actually, I do. It's from the bias interrupters. And the person who, and I'm terrible with names, the person who did that shared this research in a recent webinar. And she said that, so for every one of us who experiences any marginalization, right? Whenever we speak up against it, it costs us. It costs us in our identity and how our peers see us, but it also costs us in our own sense of esteem, because we've got to kind of risk being rejected every time we do it. But the only group that doesn't have that cost are white men. The research says, so this makes me think about, if we were speaking up, supporting each other more, it would take less energy. So if I support people who I don't have lived experience of what they're telling me they do, it takes less out of me to support that than it does for them to support being heard in discussing their own lived experience. So I think sometimes the diversity piece is kind of secretly keeping us against each other, because while I'm fighting for my diversity identities, the identities defined that people think are different, while I'm fighting for that, there might not be room for me to hear from another. But I think if we start thinking about how we support any examples of oppression, any examples of injustice, we can take the weight off the person who's already been hit by it, and we can actually get in line together and say, actually, we're talking about fairness for all, but it may look different based on our histories and the examples of oppression now. So example, the LGBT community will experience oppression differently to people marginalized by race. So It's not saying the same, but it is saying, actually, if we're walking together through this, we can support actual changes rather than only people who have lived experience fighting for themselves, because it actually takes too much out of any of us when we have lived experience fighting for ourselves. It actually is an awful lot of energy. It's less energy when someone else supports it.
And I look at this thing because people were always, what's wrong with these black people? They always complain about something, you know. When I think about this, and I realize the classification of races, people like Darwin's theory of evolution, Johann Blumenbach, Carl von Linnaeus, on, and the eugenists, and all of this information that's been put out, sort of measuring our heads now, you know, Johann Blumenbach, that was his thing, not the brain as much, but the skeletal, the hard thing. So looking at, oh no, they're inferior because of this, and this is written down, this is history, and then things are discredited, but again, the poison's in the cookie, so people are still believing this now. So I think of all the other groups and all that, take all of the movements so-called that took off on the back of the civil rights movement, and I start to consider the fact that, um where was I going with this? Yes, I do this sometimes, Sheila. You realize we're going to have to come back. I can't believe it's
Oh,
like
wow.
it's 9 minutes to. We didn't even touch any of the other topics. That says that we need to book again.
Perfect. Perfect.
I love this though, because what I really love, I don't know what I was saying. It'll come to me maybe by the end. I was talking about, where was I going? I was talking about oh, yes, the classification of races
Mm,
is a issue because though everyone goes through something, there's a lot of intersections here
mm,
in terms of, all right. Now we kind of got lost in it. It almost feels like, oh, forget about them. We got this, and all these other intersections. Um, we were classified at the bottom of the rung. So there's a saying that says, and I'll say this every week: white, you're right. Brown,
love
stick
it.
around. Black, get back. So just get back. I don't care where you go, just get back. So on the bottom of the rung, it takes collaboration. And now I think that's why I'm with you. That's why I love this opportunity with you. I love the fact that we were able to meet. I love that, it's just been great for me. And I'm trying to sort of push against that. There's a mistrust, you know,
Mm,
we don't trust. And if you historically, if you look at the feminist movement, it didn't have a lot to do with us, not
mm,
really. Optically it looked, but it did. So there's a real challenge in terms of when you get into areas like upper management and supervision. There's a real challenge between and nobody speaks about it, between black women and white women. And of course, I've got my white sister girls, they're great, but we can talk about these things because I've known them for over 20 something
mm.
years, right? We can talk about it, and sometimes they might not get it, but we just have a connection and we keep moving. But these things I think are really important, and I love, Sheila, I am going to make sure that you and I book again. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Yeah.
Because I think this will be amazing for our coaches and pseudo coaches too. All right. I now tell me, do you think when you look at privilege for you,
Mm,
like, is there any point of awareness? I'm not in your skin, which is, so we all have to trust each
mm.
other with being in different skin. But so you'd have to share it with me. Like in terms of privilege, what does that look like for you?
So I didn't know, genuinely, I didn't understand privilege in terms of race, because obviously when you have privilege, it's very hard to see it. So that, and I'm sure there's loads of areas of my own privilege that I've still to be aware of. But what I am aware of is when I look at where I'm invited and I look at the opportunities I have, I look around me, and I'm like, okay, well, we're predominantly white, able-bodied. I'm usually I'm usually on the, like, I'm the outsider in the group in some way. Like, I have a number of other identities that will put me outside at my age, being female, my sexuality, these things. I might be the diversity in the room, and I know that I'm not that. Like, I know that there are people experiencing massive barriers to the same rooms. So for me, the privilege first that shocked me was realizing I was in rooms other people weren't in, that I thought they should be in. The research started to say a lot. So, for instance, there's lots of research now that tells us that people who are marginalized, like by anything visual, like anything visible, so race is very visible, often have to do a lot more for credibility than people that are privileged with inherent credibility. And that's only because of social systems, not because anyone's better. It's just the social system rewards inherent things. And I suppose I started to realize that a lot of the people I was getting on the stage before were actually better qualified for the stage than me. And when I looked at the other people on the stage, sometimes I was like, we actually have a load of people outside this room who should be up here. So why the hell are we here? And that was one of my first genuine felt experiences of, I was about to swear. That was one of where I was like, oh no, I was like, this is definite privilege. But then there are other things, like I have a sister-in-law. I've never walked down the street and had the N-word shouted at me. I have family that are like, on a Monday morning going to work, random person shouts. And I'm like, that never happens. I'm not generally sexualized because of my skin color.
Right.
You know, no, I've never, like, I remember I dated this beautiful man and he was like, is this going to be an issue for your, you know, if we break up, for your future? I was like, why would this be an issue? I never had to think that anybody who dated me, that might be an issue for their future dating, because that's privilege. Like, I never had to consider the color of my skin getting in the way, and it doesn't get in the way of my experiences. And the more I see that, the more shocked I am, and that's where I have to watch the shock. I know it to be true. But also, the more important I think it is that we start calling out maybe the evidence of it. Like, actually, a lot of people who are marginalized often have more credibility, earned credibility, than the people they're competing with that often get offered the job. Like, there's evidence of this. We need to look at, like, we need to stop just being like talking about it as if our opinions are stronger than lived experience or evidence. So I suppose trying to like, and you would have heard this story, I think, in our conversation, but me trying to manage my privilege without not walking into the room is really difficult. So originally I stopped talking on stages that there wasn't visible diversity on, which meant there was no diversity on the stage, that, you know, there was nobody. And then I did a bit of work to realize that actually the key was to, when I get the door open, to hold the door open, to make sure that somebody who hasn't been invited is getting invited, so that I leverage my privilege. But in the beginning, I just had shame and didn't know what to do with it. So I was like,
oh, I love that you said that. I am so appreciative of you saying that. And I think it's important that you better write a note too, where we can pick up from where we left off. I'll make another booking. Shame. Yes, this is a big thing, right? But I'm glad you could be honest about that, because I think people out here, they don't want to talk about that, you know, and I think that's probably, do you think that's like a multi-generational thing? Or what do you think that is? That's just a historical thing? What is that?
It's in our benefit not to talk about it. Like, so if I have to acknowledge that I'm not just where I am because of hard work, but also because it's hard work and privilege, I would have to acknowledge that other people may deserve my seat. So that doesn't feel good when you succeed and you're acknowledging that. You actually have to start questioning yourself, and you may have to start making room for people who deserve to be in your seat or in that conversation.
That's a big kettle of fish, girl.
Yeah. And I'm not saying there's a right way to do this, because I'm not sure, like I'm fumbling through this in terms of, not like, I do my best to learn, but there's something about the practice that I think I will be forever trying to.
Oh, I think this is great. This is great, and it's exploratory, because we're not saying we know all the perfect thing here, but we do have a little bit of insight on some of this. But and we would love to hear from you guys out there watching. Okay, you leave your comments, feel free, because that will also assist us and perhaps where we need to go. I can't believe it's 1:59. I could go another half hour, but. But I loved having you here. It was great. Thank you for your genuineness and your authenticity. This is important. All right, guys, stay tuned. We have something for you. Hi there, I'm Sandra McKechnie from Double Consciousness. Double Consciousness looks like this: cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness trainings. I've been doing it for 4 years. We're going into our 5th year, or 41st time on Zoom, and we're doing it. Would love you to join us. The next thing that I do is I'm a certified life coach, holding space for clients in the areas of cultural awareness and sensitivity, right? So people that may have a challenge and they just want some space, a consultation, coaching opportunity to unpack implicit racial bias. Everybody's welcome, and we would love to have you in the trainings or book a consultation. And we have a free opportunity, 15 minutes, if you want to have a chat and get to know me and find out where you fit in that. The next thing that I do is I am a host for Voices of Humanity out of prconnectionsradio.com. If you want to be on my podcast and you're a fit, because it does have to fit with the show, has to complement the show and the network, I would love you to get in touch with me. And I'm also, from my heart, and I've always been a singer-songwriter, and I love this stuff. I love the singing. We put it in our trainings, our cultural sensitivity and awareness trainings. So sometimes I just sing just like this. You're all that I want. You are all that I need. And you brought me here when I can't find my way. You're all that I need. And you brought me here to pray. You should hear that with my keyboard player. It's to live for. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that helps you to know who Sandra McKechnie is. Take care. Bye for now. Hey. All right. This has been a great time, guys. Sheila, you're going to give me we'll get all your links and stuff so that when we shoot it out, I can put everything at the bottom if people want to get in touch with you. And I think that's just me getting feedback or something here. But we will be in touch again. This is Sandra McKechnie. This is my lovely guest, Sheila Walsh. I hope that this was important for you. I hope you got something from this. Remember, it is not our fault, but we, Sheila, Sandra, and you, we choose to do something about it. Thank you for joining us. I'll be with you again, okay? Take care. Bye.